Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Sudip Rakshit, who is a professor at Lakehead University, and he's a Canada Research Chair in Bioenergy and Biorefining Processes. Welcome, Sudip.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Let's start a little bit with your background. When did you end up coming to Thunder Bay, and tell us a little bit about some time before that?
Yeah, I'm from what you call East India here. I'm from India. So I'm going to give away my age, but it was the time when we had the first petrol crisis, and there was a formation of the cartel, the OPEC cartel, and prices were very high, and many countries, especially in North America, decided that they needed to do something about looking for an alternative source of energy.
This was in the mid-70s?
Mid-70s, yes, mid-70s. I'm not that old, but yeah, when I went to graduate school, I was lucky to be working in one of the best in India. We were actually working with many countries in the world, US and Europe, on getting to the forefront of that area, which was based on using agricultural residues, which is cellulosic in nature, which is the same thing as present in wood. We broadly classify them as lignocellulosic material.
Which could be like hay.
It can be, yeah, right. Rice straw means rice hay. Yeah, rice hay. In India, we worked with three types of that. There's a rice straw or rice hay, wheat straw, and sugarcane bagasse. After you squeeze out the juice from the sugarcane, you have the residue.
Right.
Because that's what is available there.
Sure.
To put it in context, we have a lot of wood here.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's the same. So I started work there in the mid-80s, and we did some very pioneering work to produce the alcohol. So producing the alcohol was available, but we still, till today, struggle with the cost of producing that alcohol. We produce a lot of alcohol and blend it with the petrol which we use in our car, but most of that comes from starchy material, which are food resource. So we are trying to avoid that food resource connection by using the cellulosic material. So anyway, I worked in India for 8-9 years after my graduate school studies in this area. And then I moved to Thailand, where we stayed for 17 years, me and my family. My son was born there, my daughter 2 years old when we moved to Thailand. So they practically have not lived in India. So we stayed in Thailand in an international university, and it was a grad school, only graduate studies, no undergraduate studies, and it was supported by many countries, including Canada. So I stayed there and continued with my work in this area, plus in food processing, because food processing is big in Thailand. And then 6 years ago, we decided that my daughter moved to Vancouver, to UBC to studies, and it didn't look like my son would go back to India for his education. So we started looking for a position here. So what happened in Thunder Bay at the same time was that our paper mills, we had 4 or 5 major paper mills in and around Thunder Bay. And with the paper industry going through a transition, we actually have only one real paper mill now. So the idea at that time here was that what do we do with these paper mills and the biomass, the wood we have? So they started looking for alternate uses, and that's what we were working on. So the in Lakehead University center called the Biorefining Research Institute was set up. And the idea there was to get people from chemical engineering, chemistry, forestry, etc., to come under one umbrella and do research together. And then they set up a chair position, which I was lucky to be nominated for. And so 5-6 years ago, I moved here with that experience of working in chemically it's the same thing, but there are some differences between wood and those straw. And that's how I'm here now, and with my children in the same country at least, I feel we are close by, though Canada is a big country, and traveling to Vancouver is quite a bit. But yeah, we feel comfortable. At least we are in the same country. Yeah.
So your training was as a chemical engineer, and so now you're really trying to say, what can we make from produce that grow,
Yeah.
rather than making it from oil?
So the way we say it technically is that we want to make the products which come from the fossil fuel industry,
Okay.
from crude oil, from oil industry, from a renewable resource. To explain that further is that from crude, most of us think that the only thing we produce is fuel, but that's not the case. A large portion of the profits which these countries make is the crude used for making plastics, and the hundreds and thousands of types of plastic and other material which we are using in everyday life.
Yeah, we have plastic
Everywhere. And those come from the crude industry, from the same fossil industry. So what we are trying to do at the moment is to try to use this renewable resource, wood and such stuff, for producing fuel and also for producing plastic and other chemicals which come now from a renewable resource. And the overall aim being that is to not to produce too much of carbon. To the greenhouse gas reduction will happen if you use it from a renewable resource.
Now help me out here. What goes into making oil? Like we understood that it took millenniums to create this oil in the first place. And I used to think it was dead dinosaurs. But is it trees and plants that actually made that oil in the first place? Where did it?
Yeah, trees and plants and organic material, broadly called biomass, under high pressure, high temperature, under conditions under the ground for a very long time, slowly become oil. That's the simplest way to say it.
Okay, so in a way, by looking now at the material that made oil over centuries, it's the similar material. It's just how can we do this without waiting for those millennia?
No, we are not trying to duplicate those in a reactor and produce the same oil.
Okay.
We are producing completely different stuff.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
But it's the same ingredients, I guess, are similar.
Yeah, we are trying to use wood, but we are trying to produce alcohol from it, which
Okay.
has the same combustive power.
Yes.
So we are not going to get the components of the high octane gases we get in petroleum. That we won't get. So you're looking for an alternative there. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. So you're really now focusing on some other materials as well, if I understand it, besides the alcohol.
Yeah,
So, most people are familiar with that ethanol, which I guess is what that was, but we're looking for new opportunities.
Yeah, we are looking for making also these plastics from them. So we are trying to make something called platform chemical. We make a chemical from the wood, which we can potentially change into a number of products. So there is a series of products which are which one can produce from one chemical. So we are targeting such material which we could use for our next step to produce plastics, to produce different types of plastics.
Okay, we need to take a short break. Please stay with us and see how we can make plastic products out of wood. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Sudip Rakshit, who is a prof at Lakehead University, and he's the Canada Research Chair in Bioenergy and Biorefining Processes. My words are getting a little bit confusing there. Sudip, we were just talking about, taking the wood and making new chemicals, one of which that could help make plastic. And you're talking about this kind of foundational material. So tell me a little bit more about this.
Let me start with the word you fumbled with. The word you fumbled with was biorefining.
Yes.
So what we mean by that is in refining is what we associate with crude petroleum.
Okay.
We take the crude from the ground and then we refine it, and we get a host of products: kerosene, petrol, plastic material, raw materials, etc. So now biorefining is, we try to take biomass, biowood and such purposes and try to do the same product. But just to clarify again, like we did earlier, we are not trying to produce the same product. In most cases, we won't be producing petrol from wood.
Right.
We'll be producing a fuel from wood. But in the case of chemicals, which can, it is possible that we try to produce the same chemical.
Okay.
So what we are talking about is, technically we call that as a platform chemical. Platform chemical means you take some raw material and make that platform chemical. And then different industries can take that and make it into different types of plastic, like say for tire, for a computer, or for a shoe. Different types of plastics can be made.
Mm-hmm.
So they take that same raw material and process it differently, or add different types of component and make a raw material. So what we are trying to do is to do the same thing and produce a platform chemical, but not from the crude, but from wood. So we are taking a component of wood. Wood is made up of three broad components: cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. The cellulose part is used for the production of alcohol in general, because once you break down, you get glucose. And once you get glucose, you can make alcohol. Is the easiest thing to make from glucose.
And glucose is a form of sugar.
It's a form of sugar. So that's the form of sugar. The other part of the wood is the hemicellulose. The hemicellulose is a little more, it has some advantages over cellulose and some disadvantages. Advantages is that it is soluble in water. Cellulose is not soluble in water. It will be insoluble. So chemically it's difficult to work, relatively more difficult to work when it is not soluble in water. Hemicellulose is soluble in water, but unfortunately it's not made up of one type of material which when broken down will produce glucose. We get a host of sugars. Chemically, when we mean sugar, now we are talking about different types of sugars, not necessarily glucose or sucrose. What the common man knows as sugar is sucrose, chemically. Glucose we also understand because we are used to it, but there are lots of other forms. What we call as pentose sugars and hexose sugars, meaning 6 carbon sugars and 5 carbon sugar. So hemicellulose is easy to work with, but contains the difficult to part of the sugar. Anyway, since nobody was using that, and that was 30 to 40% of the wood, we decided why don't we try to use that for some product.
Right, so you're using what would be called waste to actually produce something of value.
Yeah. Actually, very simply put, if you take wood and you boil it for a very long time with high temperature and pressure, the liquid you'll have, not the solid, the liquid you'll have will be having the hemicellulose. The lignin part and the cellulose part don't solubilize in water. So the color material is all the hemicellulose and extractors, which is a very small component. So in my lab, we're trying to use the cellulose and the hemicellulose to produce useful products. For hemicellulose, we're producing a product called succinic acid, which is a platform chemical, which we can use for a host of products. So that's the aim there. We're just patenting that process which we have because we developed a new process which makes it cheaper. But we are using renewable and woody material, not starchy material. Just to put that in context, in Canada, there is a company which produces succinic acid, one of the world's largest producers, and certainly the largest producer if you talk about producing it from a renewable material. But they are producing it from a starchy material. When I say starchy, immediately we all can figure that it is an edible material. So when you use an edible material for producing a chemical, you are going to raise the prices of the food material. So what we are recommending and trying to work in our research is to produce something which will not affect the food security or food cost in any way. So that's the aim. Another example of it which might be easier to associate with, we talk about biodiesel. So biodiesel is diesel which you can use in a car for running the car, but that's produced from vegetable oil. So you take, say, canola oil. Many people actually can convert canola oil to biodiesel at home, in their car park. It's very easy to do. But what happens when you do it in a very large scale is that for every 100 kgs of biodiesel you produce, you get 10 kgs of a waste called glycerol. So that makes a problem in large-scale industry. So we address that. We don't call that product a waste anymore. We call it a byproduct.
Mm-hmm.
We use that byproduct, and by a series of steps have been able to make polyurethane foam type of chemical, a plastic. The foam which we use for mattresses and such type of material can be potentially produced from a renewable resource, from vegetable oil. Very easy to do, but we are using the waste of the diesel product to use the same thing. So again, one might ask, there are so much of oil, so much of polyurethane foam, why do you make again polyurethane foam? So what we are trying to do is that we are trying to produce a specialized form of polyurethane foam. For example, fire-resistant polyurethane foam, which we can put into systems which are a danger of catching fire.
Mm-hmm.
So then we are not talking about mattresses anymore. We are talking about a specialized polyurethane foam which has specialized functional characteristics. Yeah. So these are some of the areas we are working on. Yeah.
So you're both doing kind of the chemistry of how you can extract these from wood products, and then how can we use some of those chemicals to replace products that would have been made from an oil base.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're
Fossil
taking,
fuel
we
based.
don't want to use fossil fuel. We're taking woody material. We are separating wood into its components and using some of the components to produce some products which can be used for producing what crude is used for, bioplastics and fuels.
So this is, in a way, one of the ways to deal with the issue of climate change and burning fossil fuels.
Yeah, so if you ask me to summarize in short what is the overall scope of my work, I would say climate change mitigation. And what it means is climate change mitigation is find ways to reduce the amount of carbon we are producing into or putting into the atmosphere. So my area of research is, when you say I don't use crude you take out of the ground, burn, and it stays in the atmosphere. But you take a renewable material like wood, you're taking it from a tree, you produce the carbon dioxide and you grow the tree again. If you grow the forestry sustainability, that carbon dioxide is again cycle. So that would be the broad area in which I would put myself in climate change mitigation.
All right, we're going to have to take another short break. Please stay with us, and we're going to find out a little bit more about what we can do with our wood products here in Northwest Ontario. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Sudip Rakshit, who is a prof at Lakehead University and Canada Research Chair in bioenergy and biorefining processes.
Yes.
So we just talked a little bit in the last episode. We finished off talking about how this has an impact on mitigating climate change. Can you tell me a little bit more about how does that really work?
When we talk about climate change and how do we address climate change, the whole science, it's broadly divided into three categories. One is climate science, and that would be determining what is the expected climate in a scenario of amount of carbon which we are generating. Like for example, we say we don't do anything about the carbon, worst case scenario, we're going to have so much rise in temperature.
Mm-hmm. And that will affect all kinds of things.
That will affect all kinds of things, but there is a serious group of, or large number of scientists who are geographers and modeling people and computer science people who are spending a lot of time, mathematics people, trying to determine and forecast what is going to be the future, taking into account the number of parameters, how much of carbon are we producing, how are you going to limit it. Ontario province has decided to phase out coal in all our power stations. How is that going to be affecting the amount of carbon and hence the amount of temperature?
Right.
For example, one easy way of representing it, which is being increasingly used, is how many plus 30 degrees centigrade days does Thunder Bay have in a year? at the moment. And 15 years from now, if we don't do anything about the carbon, how many days which will we have? So some predictions say it's going to increase 20-fold. Yeah, say 1 day today, or 2 days in a year we have plus 30 in Thunder Bay, but we are going to have 40 days of that temperature. So then it's going to affect climate, it's going to affect agriculture, it's going to affect many things around it. So but coming back to the story, climate science is about predicting the future of what the climate is going to be. Climate adaptation is, there are certain changes which are happening, can we adapt to them? Yeah? Like say, one important characteristic of that is, what are the health related aspects which are going to happen because of increased temperatures here? We're already seeing that. Yeah? Or for example, talking about First Nation communities, with the melt, the demography and the movement of animals and trapping is completely changing. So how do those communities adapt to new trapping situation, new type of dependent, if they're living off the soil, how do they how the food is?
And even like the ice roads that we hear
about.
Yeah,
ice roads is a
we
good
used to have ice roads all the time, and now it's uncertain.
And now it's uncertain, and then that adds to the cost of the diesel which they have to take, and all these implications are there.
Yeah.
So that's adaptation. Now mitigation is that, can we stop this change in climate in some way, or at least reduce the level at which it is changing? So two ways of doing that. One is that reduce the amount of carbon dioxide which we are producing in different ways. Use better fuels, use fuels which have, like our biorefining products which are generated but they are taken back sustainability by the plant, that type of stuff, one aspect of that. Another is, can we sequestrate the carbon dioxide? We produce the carbon dioxide, but we have a method of pulling it down and fixing it back again. So my area of research is to find ways of alternate ways to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide we produce. I've just started some work in the second aspect, which is trying to fix the carbon dioxide. There are many methods of carbon dioxide sequestration, but the costs are prohibitive, not easy to do at a large scale. Imagine a resolute mill producing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. If we have a magical method of fixing all the carbon dioxide, that would be wonderful, but we are not there as yet. So what I say is, my area is climate mitigation is to produce products which are not having a large carbon footprint. That's what we would say in our area.
And from your work so far, is that successful? Like to create some of these chemicals out of wood that used to come from oil, are we actually reducing the amount of carbon in that process? And how much do we reduce?
Now, actually, we are, like, for example, if you talk about fuels, you know that we are blending ethanol into our petrol and biodiesel into our diesel.
Right.
So there is a certain amount of decrease there because of that blending. But unfortunately for us, the nature has made biomass and plants and trees such that it's a challenge to convert them to a useful product. I put it very simplistic that we can do it, but nature, you have a tree, it can survive 150 years and it can stay at plus 20 to minus 60 and still survive. Yeah. Now, that material you want to use to your advantage to make into a chemical or a process. Nature didn't intend that to do that. So, in summary, what I can say is that, in summary of all the work so far has been that we know how to make the product, but all the products which we are able to produce may not be able, we are not still able to produce it in a economically feasible way. That stands even for the cellulosic ethanol itself. Depending on place and time, most of the cellulosic ethanol, meaning cellulose from ethanol, are still economically costlier. So you have to devise ways, give rebates, etc., for it to be successful. Not so for the starchy material. Not so from wheat straw or cassava starch or something else. Or, for example, in Brazil, if you go out of the Canadian continent, Brazil, they use it from sugarcane.
Mm-hmm.
So they are the biggest producers of bioethanol because they have the largest sugarcane plantations in the world and they can afford to do that. But that's another story. But using from cellulose or from woody material, we have a lot of technology which can produce all these products, but the present thrust is to bring down the price.
And so, what's the future look like? Will it? Are we going to find ways that we can bring down the price so that it is economically viable?
We are striving, taking it as a challenge, and then I am optimistic in the foreseeable future we will have at least a few products which will be able to replace some of these chemical products which are coming from the crude from the petroleum industry. That I'm sure will happen soon, but we need new innovative ideas to get those in place, and that's what we are trying to do.
So we only have a few seconds left, so we're not going to see right away changes in terms of the impact on, say, jobs here in terms of using the forest yet. It's going to be a while before we've perfected that.
No, there's no magic bullet there. It's going to, that's the message. But what is happening, and it's happening slowly, and that's the way to go, is that, for example, we have already started using white pellets, advanced pellets in our power plant in Thunder Bay. That's easy to do. We're using a pellet and we're using biomass. So it satisfies all the requirements.
We're about out of time. I'm so sorry, Sudip. There's so much more we could learn here. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and hope to see you all next week.